Okay, so it's not going to be news to anyone that your mindset and how you see the world really shapes your experience of it. It shapes your life, it shapes how you interact, it shapes what you think that the world is at kind of a base level. The narratives you tell about the world, the ways that you look at things, the paths you choose to pursue, they're all kind of shaped by some underlying foundation of how you interact with the world, how you perceive it, and what your base reaction to things are. This kind of base layer, what I'm choosing to call a disposition, really determines what you think and how you think about things. I think it can be changed, but I do think that it takes a fair amount of effort. I think that there's some valuable insight that can be gained by looking at your own disposition, understanding that, and seeing how that compares to other people's. As a super broad overview, just to give some background of how I'm coming to this topic, I think the mind can roughly be split into two parts, where it initially takes in some input from the outside world, and this is filtered through some kind of pre-conscious. It kind of gives the tones and valences to your experiences in the world. This is then passed on to the more conscious brain, what is really experienced by an individual. And this experience really determines the way in which a person acts. It determines what they put out into the world, how they respond to any given situation. And then if we take a look at what's happening in the dispositional or pre-conscious part of the mind, I think that it's a lot of different aspects, a lot of different parts of who you are, a lot of different intensities that make up you that are all bouncing off of each other and kind of interplaying in novel ways. And what's actually being experienced is one of these things that has been influenced by other parts of your pre-conscious mind, but really is a single layer that you get access to. It's a thought. It's a pretty singular, unified thing. It's been influenced by what has happened pre-consciously, dispositionally, but when you get access to it, it's just, oh, this thing is bad, or I like this thing, or this sounds fun. Like these kind of flat or single note valences, I think, is a good word for them, is a good term for them. And once you get access to this thing, you can kind of pursue it either emotionally or logically, whatever the logic internal to its own system is. When I use logic, I don't mean like rational human thought. I mean the mechanism that underlies how these different systems work. So you act in accordance with whatever logic is underlying this specific intensity, this specific line. And once you have this experience, you can either focus in on the experience itself, like really what's happening in your mind, what's going on there, or how you respond to it, how you choose to engage in the world because of it. And I think this is one of the first important distinctions between two different dispositions. Neither one is necessarily better or worse than the other. I certainly have my own biases because at this point in my life, I'm definitely leaning more towards one rather than the other. But if you choose to look at how you fit into the world, how you fit into the larger whole, what your actions guide you towards, then this is kind of asking what ought to be. What ought I do in this situation? You understand that something's happening in your own mind, and you understand that it's been conditioned previously, but really what's more important here is how you act, what you do in the world. And your actions ultimately determine, ultimately pattern, ultimately play into your disposition. So if you choose to act in accordance with a certain set of rules or guidelines or values, then this will ultimately feed back into yourself and determine your own disposition. In contrast to this, if you choose to focus more on the thoughts as they're experienced within your own mind, then this picks up on what your disposition is at that moment. If you're less worried about steering the ship purposefully and going a certain direction, and you're more interested in trying to understand your experience and why you experience the world in the way that you do, then this kind of opens up or gives you more insight into your disposition as it exists in that moment. You'll still only have access to that one thread or that one kind of piece of the puzzle, but by doing that, you can understand that over time and see how these parts influence each other. I think your pre-conscious mind is really changing a lot of the time. There's some general patterns that can emerge from it, but really it's always kind of a new event. There's nothing stagnant within it. It's always playing off of your most recent experiences and how you reacted to a similar situation last time. Each line that is being experienced is being valenced, being colored by this complex interaction between your different elements within your preconscious disposition. So if you pay attention for long enough to your actual experience, how you respond to things, how you feel about things, then I think that you can kind of backwards extrapolate into what your preconscious mind is doing. Instead of trying to determine your actions by some external set of values that you attempt to internalize, you can kind of backwards extrapolate what your values are, at least de facto, by understanding the patterns that emerge within your own psyche. And it's fair to say this is all entirely pseudoscientific and just me pontificating in my bedroom about how these things work. So it's not really backed in anything. However, I think that this is at least a narrativization of something that attunes well or lines up well with my experience in the matter. So if you've watched my previous videos, it may be clear that the second time, this kind of like what are my values, what is the inner working of my own mind, this is a lot more interesting to me. I think this is the general disposition that I hold. I try to be largely non-judgmental and take things on their own terms, and then if there's something that I don't like, I tend towards adjusting myself before adjusting the outside world, or looking for the outside world to change. This has both positive and negative aspects, and I think it's worth looking into both of them. But at the base level, I really like some of the fundamental aspects of this disposition. The disposition that I hold, at least. I'm not even sure I've put it in the clearest, most correct terms in this video. But I would like, moving forward, to make this work and try to analyze it and understand it and work within the structure that I have a little more, rather than trying to integrate the other side of what I value and trying to work towards an ultimate endpoint. I would like to understand my own positioning and find out what works within its own internal logic. But to do that, I think it's valuable to take a look at other dispositions as well as this one and see how they compare and contrast. So looking at how you would answer the question, what ought to be, you kind of have a position by the nature of being in the world, and then you take an action that ultimately pushes you towards an ideal. I've seen it said both that your ideal, your values are either what's at the bottom of your value hierarchy or what's at the top. It's either the thing that influences all of your future behavior, or it's the thing that you're ultimately striving towards. And these are two sides of the same coin, right? If it's at the bottom, then it's ultimately internal to you. It's something that you're working off of already. And it's already in your preconscious mind influencing how you think and how you act. If it's at the top, if it's something you're striving for, then it really is something that you're trying to work towards. It's an ideal, it's something that you see in the world that you understand you don't yet have, and you're trying to get that, you're trying to internalize that, you're trying to add that to a part of you. The logic internal to this is a lot like an attractor state. Either all of your values are coming from a single point and can be traced back to a single point, or they're all working towards some kind of singular endpoint, some ideal point that exists somewhere in the vector space of what's possible. On the other hand, the more exploratory disposition that I've been outlining is a lot more like crystals growing from a solution. The positioning and the personal interpretation and the action that you take are all playing off of each other in a kind of soup, in a kind of milieu. And when a crystal is growing, there's a nucleation site. There's some kind of imperfection or something a little other that can be latched onto and grown out from. But there's no overarching logic of the system as a whole. There's only localized logic. There's only localized playing fields that you have to play within, play off of, build off of, construct from. The positioning and your action and your interpretation of events all play off of each other, and there's no part that's necessarily directly informing the other. Your interpretation of events determines what action you will take, but the actions that you take over time determine your position within the game, the meta games that you're playing, and that positioning really plays back into how you interpret things. It plays back into what kind of outlook you have about the world. You still may be attracted towards states, but that's only because they're localized, because there's something pragmatic about being able to play off of where they are in the field. And to go back through and go over some of the positives and negatives that exist within both of these systems, I think the value driven attractor state mindset, it provides really firm grounding, some direction, strategy, and stability. These are all really, I guess, looking at them now, kind of the same thing. It's speaking to some underlying thing that, like, if you have a good system in place that you can rely on and continue to use over time, then that provides you with a real security. Like, you know what your role is, you know what to do at any given time. Some of the potential negatives that can come with this is a low adaptability and a state-focused mentality, where you kind of have to use the same logic, play the same game, build the same tower all of the time, which is, of course, the flip side of stability and security. With stability always comes some lack of creativity or exploration. And depending on how you look at these things, judgmentality, making sure that you have the right ideal, and making sure your values can't be undermined, these are all weaknesses maybe, or things that could potentially go wrong depending on how you look at it. With judgmentality, that's certainly good insofar as you know how to build, you know how to continue within the world, but also it's potentially judgmental. It potentially shuts off certain spaces that could be explored. And when I'm thinking making sure you have the right ideal and making sure your values can't be undermined, I'm thinking very much in the vein of some kind of existentialist episode where people's previously held values kind of break down and seem kind of ultimately meaningless. So protecting against that is a potential weak spot in this character class, I guess you could say, in this playstyle, in this strategy. And on the other side, this kind of crystallizing, exploratory perspective, I think has some clear benefits, especially from where I stand, because I'm certainly adhering to this to a fair extent, is like a level of curiosity, acceptance, change and opportunity, and flexibility. So curiosity, like there's no real reason to stay in a single track. It gives you a lot of opportunity to move between different areas of exploration, areas of play, strategies within life, within the games that you're playing. Acceptance is another big positive, in my opinion, where if you don't have strong judgments on things initially, if you don't have values to judge things in relation to, then it's much easier to accept any given circumstance as just what it is and try to play within that local field. Some potential negatives are non-grounding and a low tensile strength. Non-grounding is like when you need to move forward in life, when you need to make a decision, it can be difficult to fall back on anything if you don't really have something underlying that. If you don't have a framework of how to move forward, then it can be difficult to not have any logic to fall back on. And low tensile strength, I didn't give this a great name, but really it's the other side of adaptability, of flexibility. You play according to whatever the localized logics are, you build off of that. But if the logic changes for whatever reason, if something changes, then you don't really have great stick-to-itiveness to move back to the logic you were working with previously, or to move the external world to where you are. Instead, it's much easier to adapt and kind of change with the external environment, with the external world. And much in the same vein, some of the potential weaknesses, or maybe upsides, maybe downsides, are the being non-judgmental and being more passive or journalistic. Both being non-judgmental and more passive are flip sides of being more flexible. If you don't have a pre-existing thing to continue to build off of, then it can be difficult to really fall back on values that you don't really securely work for at any given time. If you're predisposed to adjusting yourself rather than adjusting the outside world, then that can become a bit of an issue when you're thinking like larger scale, either team organization or like politics, larger scale activities that require some kind of longer term vision, or rather than trying to adjust yourself to the circumstance at hand, whatever that may be. So that's about it for my first video on these kind of dispositions. I think that there's really something here that can be explored a little more, with a little more depth, hypothesized about a little more. And I do think that it's a useful framework through which to analyze how you think about how you exist within the world. If you have any thoughts on this or different dispositions that you have broadly seen that you'd like me to go over. I would love to hear some feedback in this area. I think it's really rich for development. Or if there's any external sources that have talked about something similar to this, I would also love to hear that. So yeah, make sure to let me know, either send me an email or leave me a comment if you have anything like that, if you know of anything like that. But anyway, thank you. Thank you for watching. Yeah.